Welcome to this episode of Mutual Exchange Radio, a project of the Center for a Stateless Society. Today's guest is Lyn Ulbricht, the mother of Ross Ulbricht. Ross Ulbricht was the founder of Silk Road, a website run as a market that valued the privacy and security of its patrons highly. Because of its emphasis on privacy, it quickly became famous for hosting exchanges of a clandestine nature, such as drug trades. Ross was targeted and sentenced to life without parole entirely on nonviolent charges for his involvement in Silk Road on very legally dubious grounds. His case has important and dangerous legal implications for the future of the drug war, internet privacy, and due process more generally in the United States. Since Ross's arrest, Lyn has strived to direct awareness beyond the sensationalism of the case to the issues at stake and how the case impacts freedom in the digital age. She has spoken at numerous events, appeared on many TV, radio, and podcast shows, including Reason TV, CNN, HuffPost Live, and Fox News. And she has also conducted interviews with major alternative media and major media outlets, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and The Guardian. She was also featured in the documentary Deep Web. Our conversation today focuses primarily on the details and facts surrounding Ross's case, including the incredible story leading to his arrest and the dangerous legal precedent his case sets. Without further ado, here is Lyn Ulbricht. Hello, welcome to this episode of Mutual Exchange Radio. Joining me today is Lyn Ulbricht, the mother of Ross Ulbricht, the founder of Silk Road, who had a famous case built against him, and we're here to talk about that and the legal implications. Hello, Lyn.
Hey there.
All right, let's start out by giving a general overview of Ross's story and your story and what the case was like.
Okay, well, Ross, when he was 26 years old, was very passionate about free markets and the potential for financial and monetary freedom through Bitcoin. And he started the website Silk Road, which essentially was a website where people could buy and sell what they chose as long as no third party was harmed. So, for example, there were prohibitions like there was nothing allowed related to pedophilia or child pornography. There was nothing violent like weapons, assassinations, and so on. There was no stolen property allowed. There's a whole list. And in fact, you can see it on our website from the court evidence, from the exhibits, from the actual site, what was prohibited. And I've even talked to Curtis Green, who was a top-level admin of the site, and he said that many of them would just be going through daily or often to purge the site of anything that was not complying with the principle of voluntary interaction and the non-aggression principle. In other words, not using force. So those things were not allowed, but drugs were allowed because it was considered by the administration to be voluntary. And because of that, not because he actually sold drugs, but because he created and ran Silk Road, at least for some of the time, it's very questionable how much of the time, he was given a double life sentence plus 40 years without the possibility of parole for all nonviolent charges, no violence at all, no prior history of any crime or violence at all. So we fought it, we appealed it, and then appealed it to the Supreme Court over some very important precedents that are being set with the case that affect us all, but have run up against failure every time in the courts. And so now our big push is hoping for a commutation of this excessive, horrible sentence by the president. And we have a petition at freeross.org. I urge everyone who's listening to me right now, if you think a double life sentence plus 40 years for all nonviolent charges, first-time offender, is wrong, and please go there and sign the petition. We have over 138,000 signatures right now, and my goal is 500,000. I want to be able to go to President Trump and say 500,000 people would like you to pay attention to this. This is wrong. It sets a dangerous precedent for everyone because sentencing is already way out of line in this country. People are staying in prison much longer than they used to for nonviolent offenses. And it's life sentences have even quintupled since the 80s. And the prison population has metastasized 800%. So, so that's pretty much the overview. Ross is not a drug kingpin. He's not a violent person. He's a guy who believes in free markets. He was idealistic. He was young. And he really is a very compassionate person who wants the best for people. And he's proven that both outside the prison and inside, where he's tutored and led classes. And there's actually 100 letters on our website from people who actually know Ross, attesting to his character. I urge people to read them if you doubt me. I know I'm his mother, so I'm going to say nice things about him, but it's like, he really is an incredible person and should not be rotting in a cage.
Right. So let's go into what some of those precedents were. And well, let's start before the trial and talk about Silk Road for a minute a bit more. You mentioned it was started this goal of any free exchange that doesn't harm another person should be facilitated or allowed at least. And the technology of the website was operated using Tor, obviously the hyper encrypted web browser, and Bitcoin. Everyone knows what it was, but when it was started in 2011, correct?
I believe that is correct.
Yeah.
Ross was arrested in October of 2013. So yeah, I think you're right. But that's certainly close to that.
Yeah. So the story is he gave up administration of the website at one point early on, correct?
Yes.
Yes, and that was.
He's not a computer programmer. You know, it's pretty hard to run a worldwide quote unquote drug empire from your laptop in a cafe alone without any computer programming training. He was trained in physics and material science. He's a science guy.
Yeah. So he gave up administration of the website pretty early on before things got too extreme into drugs, correct?
I'm not sure exactly what was being sold at that time or even exactly when it was. I know that the big drug deals, because it was mostly almost all the drugs, and I've heard the quote of 75% of the drugs sold on Silk Road were user amounts of cannabis. It was not a big drug deal site. It was users. It was people who wanted, small amounts. From what I've researched, the big drug deal started when the federal agents got involved in January of 13. They had free run of the site. They could act as many aliases, including Dread Pirate Roberts, the pseudonym for what the top admin, who Ross supposedly was the only one, which there's so much evidence that that's not true. It's ridiculous. But anyway, so the big drug deals were started then.
So let's take a step back. Ross handed over basically ownership of the site or administrative privileges of the site to this other user who was anonymous to him, correct?
I'm not the expert on all this, but I can just tell you everything that I know of was anonymous on the site.
Yeah. So he handed over ownership to this other person who was using the alias Dread Pirate Roberts, or DPR for short, right? Mm-hmm. And then the federal government got wind of it, and they started investigating it, correct?
Well, what happened was that Gawker wrote an article, and Chuck Schumer saw it. Chuck Schumer, Senator Chuck Schumer from New York, was a senior member of the Senate Finance Committee, the Banking Committee, and he was very alarmed about Bitcoin. I think that was what he was alarmed about more than drugs, and he called for the takedown of Bitcoin and Silk Road publicly, and that's what instigated law enforcement, different competing law enforcement agencies in different states to go after Silk Road and DPR. The full force of the federal government was after it. I know this now because it was revealed last March in The Intercept about a year ago with Snowden documents that the NSA was urgently tracking Bitcoin users. And, if you were tracking Bitcoin users in 2013, you were tracking Silk Road. And that's the only main, place that it was being used. It was actually being used as a currency, which a lot of people say is the reason Bitcoin is where it is today, is what Ross's vision. But in any case, they're supposed to be tracking terrorists. They're not legally supposed to track Americans. So anyway,
This is the
So,
DHSI, which is a subdivision of the DHS, who was really
oh, the NSA is the National Security Agency.
Yeah, the NSA. The NSA was heading up the investigation from the cyber side.
Well,
But
secretly, it was all in secret. It just came out from papers from Snowden that they were doing it because it's illegal. Yeah.
Right. And then there was also some competing other law enforcement agencies involved. There were, as I understand, two agents out of the HSI office in Baltimore who were involved.
Right, and that's where the corrupt agents were, who are now in prison, by the way.
Right, and an agent out of Chicago. And the HSI were involved. And
then New York stepped in.
What was the name of the Chicago agent?
Jared Duryagan.
Yeah, Duryagan, he sort of started HSI's investigation, correct?
From what I know, yes.
Yeah. And then, so he
doesn't say how or who, how he started it, really. He was very vague about that. So we don't know really what happened. But yes, he was the initial guy in charge of it.
And then Baltimore got wind of it. And the charge that they were tried with was for working with someone at Silk Road to launder Bitcoin, correct?
No, they were at the core of the investigation in whatever way. They were vying with Duryagan in Chicago for being in charge of the investigation.
Okay.
And the whole agency. The two agents that are now in prison were just simply investigating. I don't know that they were investigating specifically money laundering. They did steal a fortune in Bitcoin from the site.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
I'm saying that's what they got tried for, right?
They were convicted for corruption, for stealing, and I don't know exactly all their convictions.
Okay.
But yeah.
All right. So then they were the ones who tried to set up Ross, essentially.
I don't know, but it looks to me like
first of all, what were their names again?
Carl Force and Sean Bridges.
Okay.
Now, the jury was not allowed to know about these guys.
Right.
The defense tried to get them, addressed. They were a very important part of this whole thing and corrupted the evidence. And the judge would not allow the jury to know about them. It only came out 2 months after trial. And in fact, Sean Bridges wasn't even known to the judge. The prosecution hid him from her and from the defense and until after the trial. So the jury had no idea that there were two corrupt agents who had free reign of Silk Road and could change the evidence that they were llooking at in the courtroom.
Right. So
and had every motive to do so.
How did they ultimately catch Ross? Because
that's interesting because an IRS agent claims that he would just, after 2 years of law enforcement and journalists and hackers and everybody else trying to find out DPR, he just thought of doing a simple Google search and wow, there he was. He just found him. Amazing. And to me, it's just an obvious cover story for the NSA. So I think the NSA illegally did, but I can't prove it. But it's a pretty lame story that he did a Google search. I mean, I think they would have thought of that, law enforcement would have thought of that. But in any case, so he claims to have found his email address, and with an email address, you can, and this is one of the questions in the Supreme Court, because without a warrant and without probable cause, they can go into your computer, they can go into your internet browsing and do whatever they want and use whatever they find against you. So they got the email address. From there, they got the internet provider, Comcast, and subpoenaed Comcast to give them Ross's address. They went to his home without a warrant. They directed a directional antenna at his home so they could track him through the house. Then they put a pen trap on the router in his living room.
Without a warrant.
Without a warrant, no warrant, and in secret. And then from there, once they had that, they got the MAC address of his laptop. And from there, they basically turned the laptop into a tracking device. And that, it's like wherever you go, it's like a collar on an animal. Wherever you go, they know where you are, what you're doing, all of that. This was all without a warrant. They can do that to any of us, and probably are doing it to people. The Fourth Amendment was, the question here before the Supreme Court, because there's a law called the third party doctrine that's based on the dial telephone 40 years ago, and they're still using that. But the amount of information that this technology now can yield is so vast compared to the dial telephone that the law has not kept up with it, and the Supreme Court unfortunately chose not to address it this time.
1979 is when that law was
That's correct.
passed. And obviously, so the original third-party doctrine law was basically if you dial in a phone number, you're supposedly relinquishing your call history to a third party, quote unquote.
You're at least relinquishing that number. I don't know. Is it the call history? It looks like you're reading
yeah,
it.
it might be the number. I forget if it's the call.
Yeah. And even then, 3 Supreme Court judges dissented, saying, no, this should be private. This should not, just because the phone company has your number doesn't mean you should have to give it up, even in those days. But now it's just, crazy how much, they have our medical records, our religious orientation, our political persuasions, our sexual orientation, our apps, and on, all kinds of relevant information that's yielded with all of this that they don't have to have a warrant or probable cause. They do it in secret with no oversight. It's very alarming. It's a slippery slope to some real tyranny, I think.
And so now they're trying to apply that same exact logic to internet service providers, which is what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly. They're saying it's like the phone company with a dial telephone.
Right. So they catch Ross through this way that is legally dubious at best. And let's get to the trial a little bit now. So you mentioned earlier that, well, first let's mention the evidence that they had against Ross, because it was all from things that they had on his laptop, or they claimed they found on his laptop. But it's pretty clear that they might have tampered that evidence, correct?
Well, just read Railroaded. Maybe you did. The section on the laptop, oh my God. Anybody, and I'm not very technical, but people that read it go, oh my God, this is insane. But I have had experts say, they broke protocol over and over again. One of the agents had the laptop with no one knew where it was just him and the laptop for 3 hours with no verification of what he was doing. This is totally against protocol.
Wasn't it also true that it looked like they were editing metadata for various files on Ross's laptop to make it look like he was editing Silk Road related files when he wasn't?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. When you start getting into that stuff, I'm like, just say metadata. My brain goes away. I'm sorry, I'm the wrong person. But it's all footnoted and railroaded. And I don't want to say something wrong, because I really don't quite grasp it all, to be honest.
Right.
Believe me, before Ross was arrested, I didn't even have a smartphone. So I've made a lot of progress. It's been a steep learning curve, but I'm old.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mutual Exchange Radio. I just wanted to interrupt our good conversation with Lynn to put a plug in for the center and all the great work our writers and scholars do at C4SS. We have lots of informative studies and articles and essays about market anarchism from our scholars and authors. This project and all of the work from C4SS would not be possible without the help of our donors and supporters. In particular, this project, Mutual Exchange Radio, is supported by our Patreon. And if you would like to support the show, you can help us out by pledging a monthly gift at patreon.com/c4ss.org. That's C4ss.org. I'll mention a few more details about how you can help out at the end of the show. Thanks, and now back to my discussion with Lyn Ulbricht. So we have these agents track Ross down with this somewhat legally dubious justification under the third-party doctrine, and they were probably creating a story for how they got access to him in the first place.
I think so.
Right? And then the trial comes about, and he's arrested in 2013, correct?
Correct. October 1st.
Right. When does the trial start?
The trial was January 13th.
January 13th, 2014?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. The trial begins on January 13th, 2014. And what evidence was the jury not allowed to see related to
that? There were 2 corrupt agents, federal agents at the core of the investigation who had unfettered access to the Silk Road. They could change passwords, PIN numbers, they had keys, they could change any text or content on the site in the Silk Road forum and in the marketplace. They could act as aliases, including Dread Pirate Roberts, without the knowledge of those people. They had keys to the kingdom. That's basically what one journalist said. And they used it to steal a lot of money from Silk Road vendors. And but they also could have done many other things. It's like and in fact, there was another case, a Silk Road defendant, who he only got 3 years he was going to get 6 because he actually sold drugs. Ross didn't, but the judge cut his sentence in half because of this corruption. So, and the prosecutors of those guys that were corrupt said that they tainted all kinds of investigations, especially Sean Bridges. The guy's name is Jason Weld Hagen. He got 3 years. He was the biggest meth dealer on Silk Road. And Jan Slomp, who was the biggest overall drug dealer and has the same offense level as Ross, he actually sold drugs, or at least, was convicted of that. He got 10 years. Mm-hmm. Ross got double life plus 40 years. And this is why I believe it's a political case.
Right. So the jury didn't have access to the fact that there were these 2 corrupt agents working on this case.
Yeah.
Were then tried 7 weeks later, correct, or 2 months later?
2 months after the end of trial, and trial was like February 4th, I think it ended. Pretty sure.
So April, May-ish of 2020, they were arrested for corruption charges. Jury didn't know anything about
I think so. I'm not sure of their exact charges, but it had to do with their corruption. Mm-hmm.
Jury didn't know anything about that. They also didn't know anything about the actual evidence that the prosecution was bringing against Ross regarding his laptop files, correct?
Oh, well, what happened was one agent on the stand said, he admitted under oath that he did not follow the guidelines. Mm-hmm. And it was starting to come out. The defense attorney was trying to draw out the government witnesses about their protocol and how they handled the laptop, and the judge shot it down. And then she said, well, bring your own technical expert, which puts the burden of proof on Ross, which is unconstitutional. The lawyer called for a mistrial, but he did call for another expert, Stephen Bellavin of Columbia University, and she wouldn't let him testify. Sorry about that. She wouldn't let him testify once she shot that down. So we weren't able to have a technical expert explain how open source networks are. You can't say anything about reliability about open source networks. There were a lot of questions about the timestamps. There were questions about the protocol. There was he would have challenged the testimony of the government agents, and we weren't allowed to bring him in. We weren't allowed to bring in the Bitcoin expert, Andreas Antonopoulos, who's world-renowned Bitcoin expert, to explain why the government's Bitcoin witness was wrong. And, the way he explained it didn't make sense really. And we weren't allowed to bring him either.
So the judge's name was Forrest, correct?
Catherine Forrest.
Who was appointed by?
Chuck Schumer. Well, she was appointed by Obama on the recommendation of Chuck Schumer.
Okay, great.
Chuck Schumer is all over this case. Right. He's the one that started the whole thing. Preet Bharara, who was his special counsel for years, he got Preet Bharara his job as U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. Their cohorts, their collaborators. He was the lead prosecutor. He was since fired by Trump. And Catherine Forrest was recommended to the bench by Schumer. And Ross was arrested and lived in California and was brought back to Schumer's state for trial.
Right. And didn't Schumer's office put out a public statement?
Yes.
In this case. Was that during the trial or before the trial?
Before trial, he says, congratulations, Eric Holder, you got your man. And I'm like, hang on, aren't we supposed to be innocent until proven, keyword, guilty? But Chuck Schumer doesn't care about that, apparently. And he came out publicly to say, yeah, you got him. Ross is guilty before trial, which in my mind taints the jury pool.
Yeah.
Which is coming from New York, and he's a senator. Mm-hmm.
So after the trial, let's talk about the sentencing real quick, because this is where your accusation that the case sounds very political becomes pretty clear. What was the judge's sentiment at the sentencing hearing? Because Ross was found guilty of a kingpin charge, correct? I guess first let's talk about the dangerous precedent that sets and how that violates previous laws. What was the reasoning for Ross's being charged with a kingpin charge?
Well, initially he was charged with trafficking drugs on the internet. Mm-hmm. And that comes with a 10-year mandatory minimum. Mm-hmm. The prosecution said, we can offer you 10 years, but we're going to recommend life to the judge. And Ross, that's not really a deal, because the judge did give him life, and then you can't even fight it. So Ross said no. So then they said, if you don't do that, we're going to bring on the kingpin charge. That's going to be a mandatory minimum of 20 years, and we're still going to recommend life. So it was such a bad deal that Ross was advised not to take it. I believe he would have taken a 10-year if he knew it was definitely just going to be 10 years, because you never win in court. It's like very rarely. It's very rigged against the defendant. That's why 98% of people plea. But so the kingpin charge was one that was used as a threat. They know he's not a kingpin. They know he's not El Chapo or Pablo Escobar. They know very well that he's not. But this is what they used, and this is what some of the media use to sensationalize this case. It's absurd. A website host is a kingpin. Does that mean Jeff Bezos is a kingpin because he sells, I buy and sell stuff on Amazon? I mean, it's unbelievable. But anyway, that's what they did. And also the kingpin charge requires that certain the jury votes on specific things, and I can look it up. I'm going a little blank on exactly. It never happened. The jury never ruled on the kingpin charge as it should have been. And the judge made some argument about that was okay, and Ross got that second life sentence. He would have still had the life sentence from the first one, but it's a mandatory minimum. She gave him life. She had the discretion to give him life, and she did, and she would have. But anyway, so the kingpin charge requires, you can try to find it if you want, but anyway, requires certain things that were not met. But the judge said that was okay.
Mm-hmm. Because this is a law that's designed to go after, the Pablo Escobars, the cartel leader.
Exactly.
In this case, it was just someone who started a third-party website that other people committed illegal activity on.
Exactly.
So there was this line that your defense attorney had during the trial where he was like, this is like saying AT&T is guilty of a kingpin charge every time someone facilitates a drug charge using an AT&T phone.
Well, there you go.
And
yeah, so and it's a principle called vicarious liability that is saying you're responsible for other people's actions, and that widens the criminal umbrella dramatically. So, for example, the federal government brought criminal charges against FedEx under this principle, because people were using FedEx to ship illegal pharmaceuticals. Not that FedEx was, but these people were using FedEx, and they were bringing them criminal charges. FedEx fought it, and they eventually dropped it. FedEx has very deep pockets.
Right.
But same principle, and it's a really dangerous principle. When you think about it, it's like and I can be held responsible as a website host, for example. I don't even know what's happening necessarily. But I'm being charged the same way that under vicarious liability that is if I were doing it.
Right. And that sets a dangerous precedent for
very.
That's the thing. This case is way bigger than Ross. This is
way bigger.
Due process and overcharging innocent people for crimes and basic privacy rights for everyone else.
Mm-hmm. We have a whole page on the precedents on our website, all the precedents that it's setting, and they're all very alarming.
Right. So it's sentencing. You mentioned the judge optionally gave.
Yeah, she in fact, not even the prosecutors were asking for that. And like I say, she could have given him 20 years, which is long. That's a long sentence when you're a 29-year-old guy. It's like, it's a generation. It's a long time. And that wasn't long enough for her. He was her 5th life sentence that year, and it was only May. She's known for being incredibly cruel and harsh. And so he unfortunately got her as judge. I'm not so sure it was an accident, but that's my personal suspicion. In any case, yeah.
There was another interesting moment where she started reading things that DPR wrote at the sentencing trial. DPR wrote, and she alleged Ross wrote it. Again, it's not clear Ross wrote those.
No. And
she goes on this political rant about how you think you're bigger than our democratic laws.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where you're charged that this is a whole case. Like I was thinking, oh, they just want to make an example out of
Well, that's true too.
using new technology the whole time.
That's true too.
And when you get to that part of the sentencing trial where they're bringing up his specific alleged political views as a reason extra harsh on him, that sets a dangerous, First Amendment precedent.
That's First Amendment. I mean, she said, we know you started this site for philosophical reasons. That tells me she knows he wasn't starting it to be a drug kingpin. It was for philosophical reasons. And then she said, but we're just not sure it's a philosophy you've left behind. Which says to me, she's saying, well, if you could give up that philosophy, I wouldn't have to put you in the cage for the rest of your life. This is a blatant violation of one of our most fundamental protections, the First Amendment, free speech.
And that's before we talk about, the Fourth Amendment that it violated.
Yeah, and the Fifth Amendment, and there's a lot of laws that are being broken in this case.
So,
Sixth Amendment. That's another one. Anyway,
sentences Ross to a double life sentence, and 2 months later, as we mentioned, two of the agents responsible for his case are brought up on criminal charges.
Mm-hmm.
And other cases.
And by the way, Carl Force, one of those agents, is the one that they were basing the murder for hire allegations on his material. And he's in jail. Okay, he steals. He's not someone that I personally would put a lot of faith in the truth from.
So let's talk about the murder for hire aspect, because that was something that Ross wasn't charged with. What was that part of the story?
Well, he was charged in Maryland, where the corrupt agents were operating, where I think there was other corruption as well. He was charged in indictment, and they just sat on it. They didn't bring it to trial or anything. They didn't prosecute it. They just sat on it. But they've recently, pardon me?
What was the basis for that charge?
The material provided by the corrupt agent.
Did another murder for hire actually happen, or was this
no murders happened at all. They did dismiss this, by the way, with prejudice this past June. So all charges have been dropped. But it never was charged in New York and never charged at trial. The jury never ruled on it. He was not convicted for it. It was never proven. And yet the judge used it to justify her draconian sentence.
And Force was the one who brought this up.
Yeah, she brought it up.
Okay.
Yeah. And the appellate court said, well, yeah, it really drove that sentence. I'm like, hello, it wasn't proven. It wasn't even convicted. It wasn't even charged. Yeah. Think of what that position puts all of us in, that we can go to jail for life for something that we've never even had the benefit of a jury ruling on. And of course, this is a direct violation of the Sixth Amendment, which was written to protect the accused from rogue judges deciding they knew better than a jury and throwing somebody in jail for what they decide is true. One person. You're supposed to have 12 of your peers. That is a fundamental pillar of our justice system. It's supposed to be.
So let's talk about what this means for everyone else as well, not involved directly in this case. Mm-hmm. As we mentioned, the third-party doctrine applying to, this is the reason why it was appealed to the Supreme Court. How many people wrote amicus briefs? There were
21 groups
Cato Institute
that supported it. Yeah, from all sides of the political spectrum. It was, from the conservatives to libertarians to progressives. It was everybody agreed that this was, a terrible case and that needed to be fixed.
It basically says your digital life is not subject to habeas corpus.
Fourth Amendment protections. Yeah.
Right. And that's a very dangerous precedent for the future. Yep. Basic online privacy. The way we brought up the kingpin charge, bringing up very dangerous precedents for future people who are tried with crimes they didn't commit but might have been a third party in facilitating.
Right, vicarious liability. And of course, the whole assault on privacy, like we talked about, the assault on free speech, using uncharged crimes like we talked about. And then there's the excessive sentencing. These sentences are just, since the drug war, have just gone crazy. And So, and I believe there's a big financial incentive for that, and also a power grab. You know, the mass incarceration, which is fueled by the drug war. Without the drug war, it wouldn't exist. It wouldn't be. Over 60% of inmates have drug
At the federal level.
related. Yeah, it's a huge moneymaker on so many levels, and it's, as in this case, shredding our protections. And that filters down to all kinds of cases, not just drug cases. And then there's, of course, the prosecutorial abuse involved. And then there's lower evidence standards. All the evidence, there was no witness to say Ross did this. The only witness said Ross told him he had passed the site along.
Right.
That was the only live witness. There was, and it was all digital, which is very easily manipulated, tampered with, deleted. And in fact, after trial, not only was it discovered that someone, while Ross was in prison, Dread Pirate Roberts logged in to the Silk Road Forum,
Mm-hmm.
but also that evidence.
Multiple people had access to this account.
Yeah. And also that, and so, but Ross is being held responsible for everything. And the other thing is that big chunks of the evidence were deleted by somebody with high-level administrative access. And because we found the original, I didn't, but the team did, the original file, as opposed to what was shown at trial. And it shows huge chunks of very important parts deleted. And so we know things were tampered with. There's much question, as you brought up, with the laptop investigation, but it's all digital. And, I've talked to crypto experts. They go, it is child's play to get on, to remotely access a computer or to plant things on, it's easy. And this puts us all in danger too, because we live in a digital age.
All right. So let's talk about the personal aspect of this, because he is being imprisoned in Colorado, correct?
He's moved now to Tucson, Arizona.
To Arizona now. So you moved out to Colorado when he was there, correct?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm leaving. I'm just taking me a little while.
So what was that sentence like for you?
Oh man, well, honestly, it was probably the worst day of my life, and my husband's. We were just sitting there, just so devastated after that sentence. It was hard to believe it. It's kind of like when someone dies and you wake up the next day and you're like, this isn't, you forget. And you wake up and you kind of have to wake up to remember. And then you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And seriously, I ended up in the hospital. I had such it was just so hard. It was awful. And, it's not only Ross that's suffering this. I think I said there's like 17,000 nonviolent people with life now. When I was growing up, you never got life. Hardly any. You had to be a mass murdering maniac to get life. Nonviolent people did not get life. And now life sentences are casually given out, as far as I can tell, or virtual life, where it's so long that they'll die in prison. And it's just not American. Not our real values. This is really alarming what's going on. And, for example, Ross had a friend in Florence. He's gone, Ross has moved, but named Tony, he's got a life sentence for selling marijuana 13 years ago that an informant said he sold. And the prisons in Colorado where it's legal on the state level. And he's got a life sentence, no violence, for marijuana. Mm-hmm. It's like, this is wrong. This is an evil thing. And it's not only so hard on, of course, the inmates. It's just, live with a life sentence, for the rest of your life, you're going to be in prison. But the families, you can never really rest or forget it. It's just with you all the time. And which is why I'm so ardent about trying to get him out and being willing to move, to be near him, to give him that support and just do whatever I can. And it's not just for me anymore. It's also all the families I've met and the children that I've seen that are being damaged by having their parents in prison. And they're more likely to go to prison. I see them clinging to their dad and having to leave after the visit and crying and sobbing. And it's so, and these are nonviolent guys. And this is so evil. It really is. And people are making money off it, and that makes it even worse. That's human trafficking, in my opinion. You're making money off human beings, and I don't know how people sleep at night. doing it.
And that's before we get to the just losses for society of not only all the money to keep up these prisons and fund private prison contractors, but also just the fact that these people could be contributing to society in some way.
Absolutely. And their families. And of course, the families and communities are so impacted by the loss of their loved one, and it ripples out. And, it's just horrible. Absolutely. It's a huge cost. And, the drug war itself, it's been going on for over 45 years, over $1 trillion with a T. I think we could use that money in our budget, but anyway, $1 trillion. And people are still doing drugs. They can't even keep drugs out of the prison, and they keep it up. And I don't believe even the government is that stupid. I think they know it doesn't work. I don't think that's why they're doing it. Just who benefits, Well, we can see who benefits, and you can just see the top lobbyists against legalization, marijuana legalization, prison guard unions, police unions. I mean, it's a jobs program for these people, big time. The private prisons, pharmaceutical companies, and alcohol and beer companies are the top 5. And that doesn't even count the cartels, because they're not an official lobbyist.
If
you want to get rid of the violence, make it legal where the cartels, you don't see Absolute and Smirnoff having street fights, turf wars over who's going to sell their vodka. Because it did back in when alcohol was prohibited. And after they made it legal again, violence decreased over the next 11 years. It's just a total setup for violence and corruption.
Yeah, there's a Baptist and bootleggers aspect going on there. And we look at, the drug war, there's a lot to dissect there. There's the fact that they also target the most vulnerable in society. 80% of people in federal prison and 60% of people in state prison on drug offenses are Black or Latino. And it's pretty wrong. So,
well, they're easy pickings. You go into those neighborhoods and you can just scarf them up. So and then law enforcement people get their little notch in their belt.
Right.
And actually, Neil Franklin, who's the head of Law Enforcement Action Partnership, told me, he goes, well, violent crimes aren't being solved or pursued because it's a lot easier to arrest a drug offender and a lot safer. So actually, violent crimes are not being solved, but they can just scarf up a bunch of drug arrests and get their same amount of promotion.
Right. So let's talk about what the appeals process was like, because after Force and Bridges were indicted, a bunch of their cases start getting a second look in appeals, right? You mentioned the one case where that happened. So you guys tried that with Ross, correct?
Yeah, Ross appealed to the Second Circuit again in New York. That got shot down. They completely defended although our Supreme Court lawyers were like they were totally wrong to do so, defended the judge's use of uncharged crimes to justify the life sentence. They said, well, we probably wouldn't have given that sentence, but it's okay that she did. And they also said something, they said, actually their response to their reply and ruling was that a lot of problems with it. But one of the things was, they said, Ross, because he doesn't agree with the law, he's a bad candidate for recidivism, meaning that he will go back out there and do it again. Now, a lot of people don't agree with the law. The drug laws are, a lot of people don't agree with, and they don't agree with a lot of the laws. So does that mean we're all candidates for being thrown in jail? Of course he wouldn't do it again. He's not a fool. I mean, it's absurd. He's, a different person than he was when he was 26. He's 35. He's paid a big price.
Literally.
And he hasn't been on the internet. It's not like he even could. And this Second Circuit just, oh no, well, he's got to stay in a cage for the rest of his life because he might do it again. And I'm like, no. They also punished him for being high profile. He's the head on the spike of the medieval castle. That's what Ross is. This will happen to you if you do what he did. Meanwhile, and they even said, because you're the first to do this, you're going to get the full force. Well, it didn't work. There's at least 3 times or more dark net sites that don't have necessarily the ethical constraints of Silk Road now.
Mm-hmm.
and it spiked right after the sentencing. So yeah, so the appellate court shot it down, which was disappointing, but actually not. I thought they might not. I thought and prayed that they would let him have another chance at sentencing. The sentence is so out of bounds. It's so cruel. I thought they would rule that he could get a new sentencing, and they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So then we went to the Supreme Court.
Right. And that was dismissed without comment, correct?
Yeah, and that was different things. The Supreme Court doesn't get into the weeds of a case. They talk about precedent, right? So it was the Fourth Amendment question that we've discussed, and the Sixth Amendment question of, bringing in uncharged crimes to sentence somebody,
right,
that we discussed. And they kicked it down the can down the road. This has been going on apparently, and I didn't know this, for a long time, both with the using uncharged crimes and of course the thing with the Fourth Amendment, because that's been going on since 40 years at least. Oh. So yeah, they chose not to address it.
Yeah, that's
unfortunately
hard. So I get what now? Well, first of all, the other people who were tried with Silk Road copycat type sites, were any of them caught? What was their sentence like?
Yeah, the guy Blake Benthal, who was running Silk Road 2, which the government said was identical, except bigger. It sold more drugs. It had more listings. I guess it had the momentum of Silk Road, whatever. Mm-hmm. He was spent 13 days in custody and walked out a free man. Jeez. Don't know why. Did nothing. He's basically free, and I have no idea where he is. So it just goes to show that they don't really think Ross is dangerous, because if they thought Ross were dangerous, they would think Blake Benthal was dangerous, and they wouldn't let him out. They're not protecting us. It's a political case. They were worried about the Bitcoin. And that's what I really think it's very obvious. That's another thing that makes it obvious.
And what next for Ross? You mentioned at the top we have this other clemency.
Yeah. Please sign it. It's not a guarantee, but it's a good PR tool to say to the president, 500,000 people think you should look at this. This is wrong. This sentence is wrong. And you don't even have to think, oh, well, what Ross did wasn't wrong, or Silk Road wasn't wrong. Just the sentence needs to be changed. And we're not even asking for a full pardon and saying, oh, let him off completely like he never did anything. We're asking to commute the sentence, correct this sentence. Time served. He's done almost 6 years. Well, 5.5. Also, or even if they gave him 10, that's the same as the biggest drug dealer on Silk Road. It's still a lot of time, but it's still, you have some life left after. And Ross has a lot to contribute. He's dying to get out and get involved in, with criminal justice reform, with all kinds of things. He's studying artificial intelligence in there and physics. And, of course, he's very interested in cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and all that stuff. And he's a smart guy, and he's got a lot to contribute. And also, he's a very compassionate person. And wouldn't hurt a fly. Is not a danger to anyone. And it's going to cost the taxpayers if we don't get him out, which we will. I'm not even going to say it when we get him out. But a life sentence costs taxpayers about $2 million an inmate. It's a lot of money. And in most cases, it's a total waste.
Right. Well, I think we've covered all the ground.
Yeah, we got into some pretty detailed stuff.
Yeah. The question I like to end this podcast with, and I'm not sure it fits for this type of issue as much, but I'll go ahead and ask it, is what are 3 books or things related to Ross's case or criminal justice reform more generally that you read that you think our audience should know?
Well, there's something called Railroaded, the Targeting and Caging of Ross Ulbricht. It's on our website. It's totally based on the public record, unfortunately, because the government is hiding a ton of evidence about this case that's either encrypted, sealed, or undisclosed. We can't get to that, but we did get to all the public evidence, and it's got almost 400 footnotes. Did you read it? I think you said you read it or looked at it. And it's also got an audio version, so you can listen to it, and I would, as far as this particular case, I would highly recommend that. As far as other things about criminal justice reform, I mainly rely on the internet and people that are working towards this and sentencing reform. So I don't have any one thing that I can say. There is a book that's interesting called 3 Felonies a Day. And it's basically, the premise is all of us are committing 3 felonies a day and we don't even know it. There's so many laws that we're breaking. And so basically the government can go after any of us at any time. And this is pretty concerning. So, when the Constitution was written, there were 3 laws you could break, only 3. Now there's so many, they don't even know how many laws there are.
And that's Harvey Silvergate's 3 felonies a day.
I believe that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, freeross.org is your website.
It sure is. Thank you.
Right. And you can go there if you're interested in learning more or helping out.
Yeah, big red banner to get to the petition, big banner to see railroaded, and you can also just go freeross.org/petition. So it's on change.org, but that's the easiest way to find it.
Right. Well, thank you for joining us today, Lynn.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It was interesting.
Thank you for taking your time to listen to this episode of Mutual Exchange Radio. I'd like to thank Lynn again for a fantastic conversation, as well as all her activism on behalf of her son and cybersecurity for us all. Until next time, you can find us at patreon.com/c4ss.org. That's C4SSDOTORG. From there, you can support this podcast and other C4SS projects by making a monthly pledge of $5 or more. Plus, we've extended the opportunity to be listed as an associate producer on the show. Anyone who pledges $10 per month or more by May 15th will get a shout-out on the next episode's credits. And those who pledge $20 or more will gain access to additional content from our guests and scholars. Thank you again for your support, and look out for more prizes for our patrons coming soon. Finally, a special thanks to our current associate producers, Derek W., David Colburn, Wendy Stoyleroff, James Tuttle, Casey Jamal, Ackneralls, Cecil Dion, and Danny O'Brien. Thanks to our associate producers again, and I hope you will join us again next month on Mutual Exchange Radio.